Today's bike check is the 1987 General Fred Blood Pro. This bike is part of my collection because it was a very memorable bike as far as I'm concerned. It got me through the years of freestyle that I put the most effort into it and learned the most tricks. Um, you know, Upped my skill, won some bigger contests, and proved myself as far as the East Coast rider goes. As far as my timeline, I had a 1985 GT Pro Performer that was long in the tooth. And actually, I ended up breaking the seat tube off on that bike. So I needed a new bike at the time. And as it turns out, just going back through my records, as far as the stuff I kept, I found a down payment for a 1987 GT Pro Freestyle Tour. I'm sure it was because of the ads that were in the magazines. Eddie Fiola hiding the new bike. I don't even know at the time if we had seen the frames yet. When I told Mike, this is what I want. Mike at Hub City Cycles downtown Hagerstown. I was riding for the team by this time. Me, Steve Weddles, and Jamie Munson did local shows. We did contests at the AFA East Coast, mostly at the Howard County Fairgrounds and so forth. At any rate, digging into my archives of receipts and so forth, it was actually 39 years ago today that I decided on this bike. The 1987 line was coming out, and Mike was stocking these bikes. The General bikes were relatively new. I think they started in 85, 86, but with the 87 year, they upped the ante. Fred Blood was riding for him, and so was R.L. Osborne. Both those guys had come from other sponsors. So General, which was a moped company as far as I remember, and based in New Jersey. I don't know how they were distributed, how it was marketed, but Mike decided to, market and sell these bikes. So even though I had put money down on the other bike, when he got this bike in, he made an offer I couldn't refuse. He gave me $100 off the bike. So I think I'd have to look at the receipts, and I'll post them up here. It was around $270 or something like that. And I got what is a pretty nice bike. Now, it's Anlune as far as the construction, so it shares a lot of the characteristics of the Redlines and Haros of the time. And even though this bike was not spec'd superbly, this wasn't a team level bike. It came with one-piece cranks and a pretty cheap handlebar and so forth, but it did fit the bill as far as what I wanted. I liked the top tube platforms on the frames. It had chainstay platforms on it, and I could use the axle pegs. It had fork pegs on it, but you could also use axle pegs. So it was pretty well spec'd. Came with the Nippon brakes. This is the first year that bikes came with the 990 brake, the chainstay mounted brakes in this case. So I had a lot of parts off my GT, namely the flight cranks and the GT Pro Performer handlebars. So the spec on the bike was not as important to me as like the color, the design, the frame, and the basic parts. It came with 48 spoke wheels, and I ran those. At the time, I think it was during this time frame I had this bike that I got the RL Edge hub, which is a free coaster hub, one of the first free coaster hubs that you could buy. So I had the bike spec'd out pretty good. And as I said, this is a tribute bike to a bike that I had back in 1987. And I learned a lot of tricks on this bike. I performed on ramps, flatland. We did shows. We did contests. I learned a lot of stuff on this bike. I mean, double decades were one of my tricks on this bike, cherry pickers. And I'll throw up some pictures from what I have from the archive and so forth from my history on the General bicycle. So once again, I opted for this bike basically for the price point versus the GT Pro World Tour. So I could have been a GT guy. Who knows? Actually, I was a GT guy in 85. Turned into a General guy. Got the jersey that's here. So, overall the spec worked for me. It was a good bike. So without further ado, we'll do the official bike check on this, and I will be putting up some other photos and stuff if tidbits allow as this goes on. So from what I recall, it was about 2007 when I started looking for a bike, and I posted an ad, I think one ad, on vintagebmx.com. This is before the museum. And it was answered. The call was answered by Rockabilly J. He apparently was a friend and cohort of Fred Blood and actually had exactly the bike that I was looking for. Nearly NOS condition. I mean, it was not tattered and torn. Pretty good, all things considered. And I'll throw some pictures up and so forth as far as how I received the bike. But this bike is original paint, original decals. So it's awesome in that respect because that's what I wanted. I didn't want a bike I had to show chrome and refinish and so forth. So I got that. And the other important item was the general seat. I mean, when you had small items like this that were disposable, to have an original seat is a big deal. That's the stuff that I remember. And once again, this bike was an Anlune kind of fabricated bike, so it really resembled kind of a little bit of a lot of the other bikes. The cable routing and so forth, this is the first era of like rotors and gyros and things. So this came stock with an ACS rotor with the cable routing and the chainstay mounted AD 990 brake. Also the Paragon seat clamp, which was classic for that era. They were used on the Haro bikes. So really what this bike amounts to is kind of just a little bit more tricked out Haro Sport. Single top tube to platform. This bike, because of the price point, was a tri-moly frame. Just means the front tube of the triangle of the bike was chromoly. The back half was steel. Now that would rear its head later on because that's where I ended up breaking the bike. I don't know if I have pictures or whatever, but this brace on the back of this bike, I split it in two. It broke free from the seat tube from what I remember. So my other one was pretty worse for wear by the time I was done riding the bike. And it had been re-welded and painted silver and whatnot. So this bike did not have any of that damage. So it would be a good tribute bike. I had since sold my bike, what was left of it, patched up. There was a girl that used to come into Hub City and buy a lot of my old stuff. So somewhere along the line, I sold the bike and don't know how long she had it or what, but my exact General Fred Blood went the way of the dodo bird. So the spec on the bike, I had carried over a lot of parts from my GT bike, including the GT Pro Performer handlebars, because of the rotor on the bike raised your stem up. So I bought a Rotor 55 stem, which was the slant stem that they had to get your bars back down a little bit. And like I said, factory on these bikes, the hindrance was cheap handlebars, cheap stem, one-piece cranks. So I converted or brought parts over from my other bike, including the flight cranks. So this bike is equipped with 401 full wrap with the Redline chain ring. This is how I rode it. I probably have some old pictures I'll post up here of the bike kind of in all its glory when in 1987 when I was in high school when had that. Again, the General had these platforms, which some people liked, some people hated. They did grab your foot when you were pedaling, but they stayed out of your way if you wanted to use the back pegs. So along the way for building this bike, it was back in 2007 again. So I don't really recall the prices. I'm sure all the prices are double now what they were then, especially for stem. And I bought this stem NOS, like in the bag, unused. So that stem now is probably worth 3 times what the whole bike sold for back in the day. And again, I spec this bike just how as I had it. Really no frills, not a whole lot. Araya single wall, 7X, wheels, 48 spoke, just a loose ball bearing hub. And I guess the big part on this bike and the tribute portion of what I did was the ACS RO Edge rear hub, which is a free coaster. Allows you to ride backwards without the pedals spinning backwards like on a regular freewheel. So it acts kind of like a coaster brake in some respect and freewheel in others. So that's that. You know, memorable bike as far as I'm concerned. I have the General jersey that I used to ride at the contest and shows with if I wasn't wearing the Hub City jersey. And I've got some original literature from the bikes that have show RL and Fred Blood. I guess the other tidbit about this bike is, from what I heard from Rockabilly J, this bike actually belonged to Fred Blood. He had three bikes, three colors were available in 1987, and he had wanted tribute bikes of all three colors. His most memorable was the red, and from what I heard, and this is all folklore. His wife had him pare down his collection, and he was just picking out one bike instead of three. So the red was the keeper. The black and the blue both got sold. So I got the black one. So if that's true, and I really would have no reason to disbelieve Rockabilly J or anybody on the message boards, but so this bike actually belonged to Fred Blood in some aspect. It was probably more in the 2000s, more so than in 1987, but that's the story on that bike. So pretty neat. Once again, I broke mine up so bad that I had to build a tribute bike. And again, I'll have some photos on here. I had some recreation photos of the contest. I actually won the East Coast 14-15 intermediate overall for the year on this bike. And I have a picture with my trophy and so forth. And then I did a recreation like 30 some years later. But this bike came about, started 39 years ago today. My receipt shows the 28th of March when I put an extra $75 down on the $50 initial deposit I put on an 87 GT Pro World Tour. So that's the storied bike. Today's bike check. That's a wrap. The R.L. Osborne inspired Fred Blood Pro. At the time, the bike was, they were in conception of this bike and the RL bike that had the double top tubes. And the other bike was pretty cost prohibitive. The RL bike was a lot higher end. So I ended up with the Fred Blood Pro, and that's my memorable bike. So today's bike check is just another chunk of my history in BMX and freestyle. The 1987 General Fred Blood Pro.